Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill. We are excited to have you here with us.
Yes, we are. Thank you. It's our Real Talk Wednesday, so it's always a pleasure to have you join us.
Absolutely. And we love to hear where you're listening from. So please put in the comments a hello and let us know where you're listening from. This week, I'm actually in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm visiting my family down here. So I'm in a different location, but it's been great because Tiana has met her extended family for the first time.
Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it
I mean, we
is.
had a great week in Tennessee last week, and
Mhm.
Tia's extending there, and I came back to Minneapolis where it's still beautiful
Oh, is it?
fall weather. We haven't hit the cold spell yet, so
Ooh,
yay.
that's good. That's good because for a few days it was really chilly down here, but today is beautiful.
Yeah. And actually, as everybody's joining and telling us where they're from, we're going to add our guest in. Hi, Neil.
Hello, and hopefully it's working.
We are happy to have you today on Real Talk, and we're just saying hello to the audience, and they'll add where they're listening to us from, and if you even listening to us on replay, because we do put all of our videos up on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening on replay, please still add where you're listening from and use a hashtag replay.
hmm and in the spirit of like we can firefight and flex, right? Even on a live show, we still are prone to like whatever the internet gods will give us. So, Neil, we're glad that you're able to join us, and we totally understand if, right, all of a sudden, like we get denied for a bit, we'll just bring you back in with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, before we go into Neil and introduce him, which we're super excited about having on the show today, we do want to say hello to our new listeners. And if you are new listening to Real Talk Food Safety, we are Tia and Jill, and we are your go to resource for technical leadership development. We're really the only organization out there that has coaching based programs designed specifically for you as technical experts moving into that technical leader role. We have been in this field combined, 20 plus years,
Right.
30, almost 30 years.
Yes.
And we've seen a lot of stuff. So we worked in large manufacturing, small manufacturing, startup, retail, e-commerce, you name it, FDA, USDA. And one of the things that we notice is that it's hard for us to transition from being that technical leader, always thinking about data, always thinking about the science behind things, and trying to use that to influence the organization. It doesn't really work all the time, right? It's really, we got to also learn those soft skills, the influencing skills, how to be a more empathetic leader, how to really combine the technical expert right into this technical leader so that we can help organizations move forward and really lead right food
Mhm.
safety culture, that buzzword that's out there right now.
Yeah. And it's awesome because I think not only is it something that we've experienced, but Neil has done some of this too.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we talk today, we are definitely going to learn about some of his experiences, and also really plays into like why it's important that we share, because this is how we learn, this is how we grow.
Absolutely. And this is what we do on Real Talk, right? So without further ado, Neil, we will have you introduce yourself and how you found yourself in the food industry.
Yeah, so again, I apologize to everybody. We love live internet, but the internet gods aren't playing on our side today. So hopefully you can hear me well.
Okay.
My name is Neil.
Oh,
Right.
funny.
He's going to introduce himself. The internet
Exactly.
gods step
Yep.
in.
Well, Neil's going to be coming back. So this is a great time to welcome everybody. Andy from Wisconsin and Nikki, it's always great to see you with us. Hello, Elaine and Gazelle. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome, welcome.
All
How do
right,
you
I'm
feel?
back. Sorry about that.
No worries.
We're going to try to make it through this. So yesterday, of course, it worked perfectly fine, and
Of
then
course.
today when we go live, it's going to get glitchy or whatever on us. So,
It
but
happens.
a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for well over 20 years, and have grown up in the industry. My father was a food scientist, and I actually ended up marrying another food scientist, my wife. We met in college. So, yeah, somehow my sales skills kicked in, but very fortunate. But so I've been around food manufacturing industry my whole life because of my father. He worked in the chemical industry and then into consulting and food safety to finish out his career, but was always wrapped around food safety, even in the chemical industry, because of course we're trying to clean the plants to make sure the plants can produce safe food, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so back prior to, I guess you could say OSHA really. I started going in processing plants as early as the age of 5 years old,
Wow.
and started traveling with my father, working with him during the summers, um, in different situations in facilities, and just learning. And then actually ended up becoming a chef. So I'm actually a trait. Went Started off at a young age in kitchens and worked my way up. Went to college, become a chef, and achieved my Le Cordon Bleu, and then
Wow.
went out to industry, uh, owned businesses, and then went back to college and got a food science degree.
Wow, that's a really fascinating story. And I know Neil will probably he might be in and out with us, but when we talked earlier that he had been doing some work with his dad when he was younger, I didn't realize it was 5.
I
Wow.
know. Me
Yeah.
neither.
No, and that's pretty, what a unique path to go from, in industry along that path and work as a chef and in restaurants and then come back to food science. That's fascinating, Neil. Hmm. Awesome.
And can you hear me?
Yes.
And yep.
Yep. So not sure where I cut out at, but yeah, I went back to college and got a food science degree, and went out to industry, worked in the industry, became a food safety consultant, worked in sanitation and QA management. Um, and then my wife asked if I could be around a little bit more, so I left consulting for a while. Worked for a coffee and tea company, was AVP of Quality, Regulatory, and R&D, and spent a fair amount of time there. And then went to Ecolab. So, and currently on the SEAL team for Ecolab, and it's basically an internal consulting firm for our customers. So,
Nice.
I've been around hundreds of different plants, and enjoy doing it.
It seems like you've been like in sanitation, right? Like really thinking about sanitation, cleaning our facilities, and in order for us to make safe food. It seems like you've been doing that for a while, even before you even knew this is what you were going to be doing in your career.
Right. I mean, in restaurants, cleaning is important, and the chef is responsible for the food safety.
Mm,
And so ultimately, it was a transition from basically small manufacturing, ultra small manufacturing, into major manufacturing, and then continuing those same styles of practices, but then on a larger scale.
yeah, yeah. So I have a question about your experience and your take on this. So, working with organizations, restaurants, small businesses that were started by chefs. Oh, we lost them.
I know. And I think I was going to ask the same question to you.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious from his perspective on, and I'll ask when he gets back on, but even around how does he think about food safety and what's even the best way to help influence chefs in the industry?
Yes. Yep. That's where I was headed too. Just like how well prepared, like that training, like how
Right.
well did that training, would it have prepared him? Neil, we're glad to have you back because, of course, we got a million questions for you already.
Can you hear us?
All right. We see you, Neil.
Oh no. Well, I want to say hello to Mike is out there, Amanda and Nikita. Welcome. Glad you're on the call. We have Neil with us today, but we're having a little bit of internet internet problems. But I think also too from you guys that's out there listening to us, as you hear Neil's story and where he's been, we're also really curious about your perspective and what you've had dealt with, right, in your career, especially around sanitation today. But even as we look at where Neil started his career, really being a chef, many of us I know have worked with chefs in the past, right? And helping influence the way that they think about food safety and the way that they lead their businesses has been key, even in my career, right? Especially as I worked in small businesses or businesses that's trying to expand.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because not only the food safety side, but I've also seen it come through on the quality side. So, for
Yeah.
example, I remember working with a group where we were making a shift in an ingredient in our product. And even though, right, like our foodie people and the chef, they could pick up the difference. I'm like, normal people will never know. Like
Yes.
most people will never know.
Yeah.
Um, so it's always interesting to see how our experience and our background, right, plays
Yeah.
into it, like how we view things when we're at work and working on teams. So,
hmm I think something that's also really something that we all kind of deal with, whether we're working with chefs or even R&D, when they go and change the formula on something, where a lot of times it has to do with cost savings, or how do
mm,
we, or there's a problem with the way that we manufacturing, so we need to make a recipe change to solve that issue. Um, we can help influence that conversation by looking at complaints and consumer data, right?
mhm,
I've used that many times to say that we don't want to change this because we currently even get complaints around it, or we get praise around it, right? Where people
yeah.
call and say they love this aspect about the product. Or even things on the flip side that's like, well, if you make that change, they're probably not going to notice it. We can look at consumer complaints and consumer insights and say that we made the change and we've gotten no feedback on it because
Mm.
no one has noticed. We can help influence those changes being in quality, really, to say that, hey, we have this data that we could use and help influence the organization to make different decisions, smarter
Mm.
decisions.
Absolutely. Oh, because everything is so interconnected. So,
Right. Right. Exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
All right. Well, you know what? This is one of the fun things about doing a live show. As Neil mentioned, when we did our prep call yesterday, everything worked great. So, what I'm wondering is, I'm wondering if maybe what we should do, because we want to make sure that we get to share Neil's story,
hmm
is actually reschedule with him for another day. So that way we can have everybody be part of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think we can maybe use this time to kind of talk about, because we have the time, right? And this is real talk, and we're here to talk about the things that are impacting us in the industry. And so we would love to hear from the people that are listening from us. What are some things that you are seeing in your day to day, right? That is a hurdle or a barrier for you, that you would like a little, maybe some insight from the rest of the group on, or um, something on like, I've been dealing with this little piece. What are some tips that maybe this audience can give you?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, like Andy, that you included in here about, right, everything, so many things are interconnected and related.
Yeah.
Even I remember when we first started a lot of work on sanitary design and we had a bigger focus on equipment. At first it was kind of a challenge. I don't know if anyone's experienced this, but some of our equipment manufacturers are still working on designs that are much more friendly for sanitation.
hmm
But even at the time, right, we actually had equipment that, because of buildup, we would have to stop at some time during production, not always at breaks, because there was too much buildup or this wasn't working or something else. And so, even as we talk about sanitary design, I love now that we could talk about it actually can influence and impact, production and
Right.
downtime. And so, the more we connect and share how these things are woven together, the more we can get support, to help drive the food safety culture that we want and the systems that we need to see.
Yeah, and having the conversations on why food safety need to be in the conversation early on, right? Like there's been times when the team is trying to buy some equipment and I ask them questions that's just part of a basic sanitary design checklist. And it's like, oh, we didn't think about that. How are we going to clean these cups? How are we going to clean this piece that material, food material is starting to get stuck in, right? Like it's asking those basic questions where people start to think about, oh, we hadn't thought about that we're going to need to clean this equipment. And for someone that grew up in dairy, right, like for my dairy folks that's out there, sanitary design 3A standards are a huge thing in the dairy industry. But when you look at other industries, you know, a lot of the education is not really there on it.
No, I'm not going to say Wild West, but there's definitely some creative equipment making or even aftermarket changes.
Mhm.
And what I really love is right when you go into a facility and you know something's not working because our team members will show us. I
Right.
don't know how many times I've walked on a line where something's like being goofy and someone's propped up trays, right,
Yes.
or hung an apron or something to help with, some type of gap in performance that we have with equipment.
Right, exactly. So I think that's a really big one. And again, to help just the organization understand that you really need to get food safety involved at the very early stage
Yeah.
of things.
I think Nikita
I
has
like
some.
Nikita's comment about food safety is becoming a larger scope within food service operations. However, the food safety education gap still persists. Best thing to do is to start with the education piece to increase perspective. You know what? I love this comment because you're right. The food safety education gap is there. And especially in food service operations, because I mean, restaurants pop up. There's not really that many auditors, right, for a space. So auditors are stretched thin. And they really are looking at the top things, right? Temperature, hot, cold and hot holding, some basic GMPs. So that gap is still there. But as food safety personnel that's hiring into the organizations, we really are focused on how do we close that gap and um, how do we help train people on current food safety practices, right? I've even worked with some chefs where they've done some food safety in the past, but things have changed since they did some food safety work. And so helping them understand how things have changed and things they need to implement that maybe they hadn't in the past because they're trying to grow their brand.
Yeah, and it's definitely a shift. And I know we've definitely encountered with our clients, and I'm sure I'm always curious if other people are experiencing this as well. But that shift from when you're a smaller business and you typically will have your local regulations, which of course are not consistent across any state or any, even counties within a state. And then as you start having more exposure, as you start sending things out, even if it's through, online sales, you still have brand risk. And how do you elevate your food safety programs and that education in your team members that we do need to do things a little bit different?
Right, right, exactly. And that's really a hard sell, right? To be able to say that, hey, we need to do things a little bit differently. I know it has worked for us here, right? But as we get more exposure, as we grow into other places, as our consumer base change, right? Those are the type of things that we need to think about things a little bit differently. And we thought about that at Catalyst. That's why we created our maturity model, where it really looks at the piece of like, how big your organization is, how large is your exposure, those type of things, to think about what risk do you have.
Yes, it's true. And actually, while you're talking, I know Neil is, well, I'm going to just let Neil know that we're going to reschedule. So we've got, great audience questions and comments, and we'll go through some of those today and then
Yeah,
schedule some time with Neil so we can really get his full story.
absolutely. You know, Andy has a comment around the large challenge being breaking down the communication barriers and fears that are still embedded within plant teams, supporters, vendors, etc. Communication, I think, is a huge thing that we deal with, right? And I think a lot of it is, and we talk about it, I guess, from the standpoint of, we are these technical experts that have a background in it, or we've been in food safety for so long. And then we're trying to have conversations with people that maybe have not been in food safety, that don't understand food safety, that's really not as technical, right? They're really thinking about how we're going to sell more product, how we're going to market more product, how do we get into more stores, but they're not really looking at the details in the data, right? That rational persuasion, we like to call it, with influence. And so there's some big communication barriers there. And even, to address even the fears, we were talking to someone, yesterday, I believe, or a few days ago, on like just even plant teams thinking, man, if I do something different or do something more efficient, am I going to lose my job? Am I working my way out of a job? Or is this going to cause more work for me? And I think that's also the communication piece.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we don't even know the answer to those things, as leaders, having that transparency can be helpful. Granted, we don't want to create a state of chaos. That's our goal, isn't to do that. But even sharing that we don't know all of the outcomes yet, but we know that we'll be in it together and that we will navigate each one as they come is so much more reassuring to a team than not being able to share anything and have, because that's when people start speculating. We always talk about how our mindset is so strong where it likes to have a complete story. If we don't give those parts or help share in that story with our team members, like even I start creating my own story.
Right.
And I'll start filling in those blanks. And typically then that survival part of my brain kicks in and I think of the worst things.
Right.
So it
Exactly.
really is helpful as we think about fears and working with our team members. What's our role in helping navigate those transitions and those fears? And how do we really stand in there with them?
Right. And I don't think that as leaders, we put enough time into what our communication strategy is, right? And like really thinking about, how does our team like to be communicated to? What things do they want to know, right? What things do they need to know in order for them not to create their own stories? And how can I be completely transparent, right? As transparent as I can be. Of course, there's going to be things that you can't tell your team yet. And I think even in my experience, there's been times that I'm like, I don't have all the details yet. Those are the things that's being figured out. But when that's ready to be announced, you'll be the first to know from me. I think our teams understand that, right? But it's really around being transparent and understanding how your team likes to be communicated to.
Yeah. And sometimes because we have so many things on our plate, right? We have communication and then we run off to the next thing. And one of the tools that I probably should leverage a little more, because I was really good at for a while, is we call it the parrot. Like, tell me what you heard. Yeah. Which sounds sometimes really elementary and fun and like too easy. But when you have a conversation with someone and say, okay, tell me, what'd you hear?
Yeah.
Because it's always amazing the things that we think we said and what people are hearing. And so it's a really easy way, no matter how simple you think it is. And crazy enough, I use this at home a lot.
Oh my God. I was just about to say that. If you think that it sounds too easy, like try it with your spouse.
Oh no, I have to, because Todd always says, I just told you that. And I'm like, did you? Let me tell you what I heard.
Right.
And sometimes he's like, I swear you don't listen to me. And I'm like, that's why you need me to acknowledge that I heard you and what you said until you, and we do this at work too, right? I think I had communication. I move on to something else thinking somebody completely understood. And like, I wasn't even paying attention.
Right, exactly. And really around communication, you have to communicate it more than once even, right? So like you said, communicating something, having that touch base on, tell me what you heard and the next steps. But even like if you communicate in a group and one-on-one, hey, we had this conversation in our team meeting. Tell me what you think about it. What have you been thinking about, right? All of that really should be part of a communication strategy on any change, any new strategy coming through, anything that we feel like is going to cause some type of disruption, right, to our team, whether that's our immediate team or our indirect team or people on the floor, thinking through that full communication strategy is really key.
It is, and I think that comes with that alignment. And I know, right? We're going down all the rabbit trails today. But even for a team, right? We talk how important it is to have alignment and a united front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even going so far to ask our team members, right? Like we used to do this on our direct teams. Like, what's the message you're going to tell your team?
Right.
Like, practice that with us. Because sometimes, right, when someone describes it and if they're trying to describe it in your words, it feels awkward. So having people really use it and share from what it means to them, but just making sure that we're still on the same page, because it'll also highlight those areas where maybe we weren't quite in alignment that we need to clarify further.
Right. Exactly. And we love talking about this topic because this is really what we help our clients do, right? We help our clients really move from, okay, I'm trying to be this leader in the organization, or I'm going to be this leader in the organization. I really need to learn how to communicate to others. And so that's right down our alley on our technical leader development plan, in our path. So we're super passionate about this topic.
We definitely are, right? Because, like you said, otherwise we lean into data and it seems so obvious to us, so it should be obvious to others. And I'm
Right.
sure if you're listening to us today, you're probably like, been there, done that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we always, once again, love hearing like what tips or tricks have you tried to really help create that aligned, focused, we are one team, to support where you want to go when it comes to your food safety programs, your food safety culture.
Right. I think, hi, Nikki. I'm looking at your comment, and one thing around that food safety education, always evolving, and hearing people say, I took a food safety class 20 years ago, or I learned about HACCP 20 years ago, right? And that's what they're trying to go after. I think this also falls into communication and alignment. And one way is that I've heard more and more over the last couple of years, especially as we talk about building a food safety culture, right? A sustainable food safety culture, is that food safety is ongoing. It's not something that you just learn, you do, you implement, and that's it. Food safety really is a journey, and you learn something, right? And you execute it and you implement it, and things change, and then you get better, and you, like Andy said, you're continuously raising that bar because our consumer base is changing, our world is changing, right? What we like, what we don't like, different requirements are changing. There's Austin even brought up some conversations between the FDA and the CDC. Like, those conversations are always happening. So even as we talk about it from a food safety and quality expert standpoint, I think using more the words of like, food safety is not a one and done. It's an ongoing investment for your organization. And you should be, if you have a food safety, if you have a food and beverage company, you really need to think about, how am I investing in food safety every single year? And how am I raising that bar every single year? How am I making sure that we are not just staying compliant, but raising that bar as an organization and being who we want to be, right, as an organization, who you want to be as an organization, not because GFSI says so, not because the FDA says so, not because a supplier is saying, hey, I really would like to see this, but it's more like, what type of organization do you want to be? How do you want to protect your consumers? What do you want people to think about when they hear your name? That's what food safety culture is about.
It is. And I think it's also worth reviewing like these layers of complexity. Because
Mm-hmm.
while we like to geek out over the specifics in a regulation or in a paper or related to data, that's not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a skill set that we can further develop, because even when we talk about, right, so many people, we all love being able to share the why.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, not everybody loves the level of why that we want to share.
Right.
And so how do we measure how to meet people where they're at to give them the right information? So I'll use an example because I came from poultry. Like poultry, I spent many, many years at. And what I loved is even before I got there, my boss had said, keep it clean, keep it cold, keep it moving. That is all you need to do. And it really helped us come back to some of those fundamentals, because when we would get, I'm going to say a little distracted, but like kind of all in something new that was going on, right? Sometimes those fundamental pieces seem to, it's not that they're not important, but they weren't our focus. And then all of a sudden, then we see a shift in some of the fundamental pieces that maybe aren't moving or being at where we want them or need them to be.
Yeah.
And we need to come back to like, what is the simple message that everybody can connect to and we can build from there?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Austin, I love that. Can't go to the gym once a year. I wish. Right. I would check that off my list already. Right. Done. But
That's hilarious, Austin.
I know, I love that. It's so true. You really have to keep at it, right? And you have to focus on it. And I honestly love the health analogy, because it's something that we understand. And it's one of those things that's like, we know we should be doing it, but we fall off the bandwagon. We don't prioritize it. I feel like food safety is similar to that sometimes, where it's like all organizations know they should be doing it. How do we help keep them on the path, right? How do we help them go to the gym, right, 5 times a week and maintain the optimal health of the organization? And, honestly, we know that it's frustrating for us, right, in the food safety and quality industry. But that's really our ultimate challenge, I feel, where it's like, out of all these things that even we're bringing up today, how do we make sure that our organizations are prioritizing these things day after day?
Yeah, and I think that at least as we work with clients, one of the hardest things for us, and even when I was in food, in like working in manufacturing, we see all the things that need to be done.
Yeah,
we feel that weight on our shoulders that, Andy, you put, right, like, what about allergens, right? There's a new allergen. So if I'm in a facility that I'm already working on something, and even though I knew sesame was coming here in the US, like now I got to work on it. Now it's another thing on my plate. Now it's another thing. And we take it so seriously and we are so passionate about it. And one of the things that we really look to help clients do is better communicate where they're at, what they're working on, and what the risks are. Because we simply can't do it all. And what I think about is, what I love about people in food safety is we are willing to go not just 1 mile, but 2 miles. We are willing to go the extra distance. But all of a sudden, we are out of fuel. Yeah. We are tired. Our legs are giving out. And that last 100 feet is killing us. So before we get to that spot, how do we really make sure that we are, like, go back to communication? How are we really making sure we're communicating where we are, what our workload really is? Sometimes that's hard because we're like, well, but I have this project and that project and this, and I have my fingers in all these things. If we can't put our arms around that to be able to communicate it, then we're going to be right where we're at.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think as managers and leaders in food safety, one of the things we also have to look at is, how do we do that? Because if we don't, we're just going to stay in this hamster wheel cycle that doesn't serve us.
Absolutely.
And it taxes us. But we can have ways to do that. And so that's what I really encourage, like bringing that visibility. And it's going to be a big list and it might take you all day to do it. But if you're only working on 3 things and you've got the mile-long list, someone needs to know about the rest of that list and what it means.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think this also, this goes.
I'd go on that all day, because that's what we see. And that's why really, like, I think what we think is that we can just do one more day, one more night. Oh, I'll work late today. I'll do it on the weekend. That doesn't get us caught up. And I think you all probably have felt this.
Yeah.
And so we really have to step outside it's all on us. And we really need to communicate the risk of those not getting done to the organization, and real risk.
Yeah.
Real risk.
Right. Exactly. Because like you said, if we're trying to take it all, we're getting burnt out. Right. And when you cross the finish line, you're literally laid out, not wanting to move anywhere else. Right. Even though it's time for the next hurdle. And I think that goes into what a comment was saying around being short staffed and
Mhm.
putting a lot of pressure on people. And at the end of the day, we're having a lot of retention issues. And it's because there is a lot of pressure on food safety managers, especially that middle manager. And so we're
Mhm.
seeing those retention issues. And so, to your point, Jill, really focusing on how do I take care of those people? How do we make sure those people aren't burnt out? Yes, there's risk. We see it all. How are we prioritizing those? How are we still communicating those in a way that we're not putting all of the pressure on those food safety managers,
Mhm.
right? Where they're not feeling burnt out, so they're not feeling disengaged, so that we can continue pushing, right? Pushing the boat forward.
Mhm. And Nikita, and I see Austin, you say agree too, but right, like it still blows my mind that we don't have food safety budgets
Hmm.
across the board. That's something we have an opportunity on. And that's
Absolutely.
why the more we step into being an influential leader and understanding the different ways to influence, and I'm going to say be intentional.
Right.
Because, right, if we step into the conversation and we're like, hey, receiving, we need some money in your budget,
Hmm.
they're going to be like, I don't have time for that today. And I think we're working just fine.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so, how do we create intentional conversations and go into that knowing what the other person needs, how we make it a win for them, how we help solve a problem they have,
Hmm.
how then we can demonstrate like having this in your budget's going to keep us from getting back here again.
Right.
And I know that's a big sell. I know it seems like a really big road. And so taking those first steps and having that plan make all the difference.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's going to take some time really for your organization to understand
Mhm.
that. And when we talk about our technical leadership development path, this really falls within our integrated leader,
Mhm.
because at that point, after you've kind of built your leadership skills, you've created these relationships within your team, but also across the organization. Really, as you go and build your leadership, your organization, your food safety culture, making sure that food safety and quality is integrated into every part of the business, this is a piece of that. How do
Yes.
you make sure that your operations team have a food safety budget, and they are not just has a food safety budget and they're like, hey Tia, tell me what you want me to do with this? It's more around, I'm thinking as an operations team, I'm thinking as engineering, as facilities, as name it, right? I'm thinking about what type of improvements do I need to do to help move food safety culture forward. And it
Mhm.
might be, hey, we need to, rebuild this piece of equipment because we've had some food safety incidents. It might be that we need to hire someone to complete some PMs, whatever it happens to be, right? But it's something that's in the budget for people to talk about year after year on how are we as this function outside of food
Yes.
safety and quality, right? How are we pushing our food safety culture forward? And that's
Yeah.
something that we focus on as a part of our leadership path, because that is critical when integrating food safety into your organization.
It is, but I'm also going to challenge us because even in our food safety team, how much money do we actually earmark for leadership development? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so often we'll have something in there about, well, we need to do, a food defense class, or I need to go learn about allergens now that there's another one added to the list. I need to go to a show to hear what's happening new in the industry and for risk for suppliers or
Mm-hmm.
overseas or COVID or something. That's awesome. But how much are we actually setting aside to say, for me to actually be effective in all those technical areas, I need to help myself and my team
Right.
really step into how we're using our soft skills better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what are those soft skills that are needed?
Mhm.
Right? Like, I think that is really the hard
Soft
part,
skills.
where it's like if we could just read something, right, and download that information into ourselves, we'll all be great managers, right? Like we
Mhm.
can look up an article right now on what does it take to be a great manager, and you'll see a lot of the same things.
Mhm.
But it's really on having that ongoing leadership development and really understanding where I am today, where I need to be tomorrow. And then when I get there, right, understanding again, how do I make myself a better leader as I grow in the organization, as I take on more responsibilities, as I'm trying to integrate food safety. It is critical to have that piece in your budget to say,
Mhm.
I need to develop my people.
Yes. And on top of that, if you've been with us, you know coaching is our foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching is what makes the difference between I train and I do. Because just think of how many times we've gone to a seminar, how many times, or even now, there's a lot of companies that invest in online training. And I think they have great material. That is a
Mm-hmm.
great start. But we also still have many gaps in being able to apply those things.
Yeah.
And that's where coaching, whether it's frontline coaching, whether it's middle manager coaching, which,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, that's where it's really hard managing what's up here and then also right below us. That's a really challenging spot to be.
Yeah.
But coaching is what helps us along that path and lean into our own gifts,
Yeah.
right? We don't have to lead like somebody else. Like we all have it within us. It's
Mm-hmm.
just identifying those gifts that we already bring to the table and lean in.
Yes, yes, and we see it, right? Like we see it in our clients and people we have coached, where once people really understand the power that they have, the gifts that they have, it really is a light bulb moment for people where it's like, man, Jill, I know you've been telling me this for a year, but now it's making sense, and we
Mhm.
see major improvements in their food safety culture just because they focus on their leadership development,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I
Yeah.
think it also rolls out to what Andy's saying around including vendors too.
Mm-hmm.
I love it that that's one of your passions because people sometimes forget about the vendors, right? Whether or not that is a supplier that's coming in, right, or someone that's servicing you from a sanitation standpoint or a maintenance standpoint, any of those type of vendors. If we're not also thinking about how we onboard them, right? How do we identify the right partner? How do we onboard them? And how do we keep our ongoing relationship? If we're not thinking about that piece as well, right, we're also missing something there.
Well, I was going to say, even extending outside what we think they can just offer. So while
Mm-hmm.
we had Neil on just for those couple moments, right, he was talking about Ecolab has their internal SEAL team, a consulting group that is available for Ecolab customers.
Yeah.
Like, wow, wouldn't that be
Mm-hmm.
helpful to know so that if you need a little extra support or some extra training, like typically, like we all want to see you have success.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yes, it is collaborative success. That's what partnerships are about.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also where when we recognize like we don't have to do it alone. And if it was so easy and you were able to do it all internally, why haven't you?
Right.
And I
Exactly.
only asked that because I was
Mhm.
in that spot where we were trying to make changes and we were trying to juggle, like a lot of you, the normal workload, trying to move past and get over that. T and I have been talking about the activation energy. It's all about the
Mhm.
catalyst, like getting over that hump to be able to make the progress you want to see. Sometimes that's the extra hands, the extra help, leveraging someone else so that you can get over that hump and get to where you want to be and then maintain.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And we know we want to move fast, right? And for the scientists that are out there, if you think about your activation energy curve, right? That catalyst is lowering that activation energy so you can get to the spot that you want to get to faster, right? Like you don't have to get over this huge hump, right? Which might be, okay, how do we get the right people in place? And if you've been where I've been, a lot of people will say, okay, yes, we need to include vendors. We need to work on our relationships. I'm just going to put these three people that already have full-time jobs on it.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like they already have a full time job. For me to also then manage my relationship with a vendor, it's not going to get the justice that it
Mhm.
needs. Right.
Yeah.
So having people, we can't do it all ourselves. So thinking about that piece is so important.
Yeah. We once had, remember the one client that we had that they were managing like all their FSVP. And when we tallied it out, it was going to take, I mean, it was ridiculous number of hours. They needed like 3 people full time to be able to do all that work. And they had one who was also doing other roles.
Right.
So I think we really have to, use our tools like standard work list and workload capacity to really, once again, we're data driven. So why aren't we
Mm-hmm.
using it in these areas that we're feeling some of these pain points and really bring light to the spots that are creating the pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
Nikita, I love that you talk about, right? Like part of, helping other departments, Splitting budgets is a good thing, right? We can pay for this part, you pay for that part.
Right.
Awesome. That's partnership win-win. And ownership, helping us know we own it because we know the money flows.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've done something similar, splitting budgets, or even in organizations that have an integrated food safety and they have this food safety bucket, being there to help influence what they use the funds for, right? Like I remember every budgeting season going through, having a conversation with my engineering people and my maintenance people on like, hey, this is coming up. Do you have this on your capital plan? Do you have this as your food safety essential budget? Because you talked about it all year and they're like, oh, we really don't have it in the budget. It got to be next year. Well, I'm on you, right? To say, hey, is this a part of it? Do you have it written down? Yes, Tia, we got it. We got it here, right? And so that's so important. I love the idea of also splitting the budgets, where it's like, hey, like we need to do this. Why don't I take some? You take some.
Yeah. Yep. This is what I love. There's so many different ways. And so it's great to hear what people have tried, what's worked, good ideas. Thank you for being part of this community.
Mm-hmm.
We are so grateful that you're here being part of it.
Absolutely. And Nikita, we love that you love the terminology. That's actually where our name came from, with Catalyst. So for people that know us, like, and know that, we're part of Catalyst, that's where it really comes from. And we really do help our clients lower that activation energy, get to the sustainable food safety culture that they want to be in.
Yeah. Yes. And thank you, Andy, for giving us another update for Neil. We'll definitely reschedule because he's got some like incredibly amazing stories to be able to share that we can all, there's some good takeaways.
Absolutely.
Let's see, Nikki, are there
standard work lists out there for what we do? That's a really great question, right? And something that we have developed at Catalyst, and we work through that in our technical leader bootcamp, which if you're on our mailing list and you're following us on LinkedIn, there's information coming about that soon, right? So stay close to us. But that is actually one of the things that we work with the people going through our technical leader bootcamp, because standard work is so important. Otherwise, we have so much going on, right? We have so much going on. We have all these risks. We have all these things we need to do. People are piling things up on our list, right? So we actually work through standard work and workload capacity, so you can get those things under control, so you can be the type of leader that your organization needs you to be.
And one way to look at it that I think brings some light to the conversation, because, right, once again, we're often thinking about what are the things we need to do. There's such a big list, but our companies hired us to do a role. And they had something in mind that they wanted us to do. And so when we create a standard work list, like the actual work, not just the idea of what we're going to be responsible for, but here are the things that are actually using my time. That also creates an agreement and alignment with that contract, essentially the contract when they hired us. So are we able to fulfill that? And what are the areas that are unclear that we need to make sure we are having conversations about? And so it's not just an exercise it's not meant to be an exercise of just like having busy work for somebody to write a standard work list. It has a very distinct and defined purpose to be able to have that agreement. And I use the classic, and since we've been talking a lot about training, right? Like, you're responsible for training. Okay, if I put that on my standard work list, what am I actually doing? Am I developing the training, the materials? Am I delivering the training materials? Am I overseeing that training is being done? Am I running reports? We all know there are so many different parts of that, but it doesn't mean that every single one of those are your responsibility. And that's what to actually do. So that's why having a standard work list is so important and so overlooked. Sorry, I can talk about that all day. You know me.
Yes, absolutely. But it's so important. And how much time do those tasks take, right? Because a lot of people say, okay, you do the training, but we've all done training, right? It's not just the hour training, it's the conversations after the training, and it's the follow-up, and it's it's the presentation creation, even if you have something, right?
Yeah.
It's the looking through it, making sure it's still relevant. How do we update it? It's all of those pieces. And then you guys should also be thinking about the coaching aspect of it, right? Because it's not just the training, right? Like you have to get to execution. And so how is that built in? And so that's important to even think about when it says you're responsible for training.
Yeah. And then once again, what I love about what we do is we love doing what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So we're often like, yes, I'll take that on. And of course, that's important. But we also have to be really realistic. Like, if that means it's, it's taking up 20% of my time, do I have 20% of my time to give? Even if it takes up 5% of my time, do I have 5% of my time to give to that?
Right.
And it really helps us start in those conversations so that we are managing our workload much better than we are today.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I think also too, some of the things, I think Andy had mentioned this before on like even identifying opportunities and working through problem solving on, what's the root cause, corrective action, how to implement those preventative actions. All of that piece, right, could be a part of your work and should be a part of your standard work, your work list in your workload capacity. So it's even diving in even deeper into those aspects of your job, not just the, okay, how do I help with allergen management and those pieces. It's really around how do I also identify opportunities and solve problems that come up, right?
Yeah, nope, it's so powerful. So
yeah.
Gosh, well, I know we are kind of getting close to the end of the time that we normally have. And let's see, we've talked about communication, regulations, leveraging vendors, standard work. What else?
We talked about, honestly, Jill, I would say like this is one of my favorite shows because
It drives me
you
crazy.
guys
It's
know,
so
like,
unscripted. And not that we script it for you, but we
right,
usually have at least some bullet points because we want to make sure it's valuable when you are here.
right. Nikki, I love your comment. Like I know there isn't 16 of me.
Right.
Woo,
We wish there were. That would be
right.
awesome.
Exactly. But you know what? That's why I love these conversations, right? Because it's like, it's one of those things that help us realize that, man, we do have a lot going on and we are so valuable to our organization. And it really is up to us to understand, like, there's only one of me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I want to be able to present you with the risk on where we are. There's only one of me. So that's what it means, right? When it says we need to prioritize our risk. And this is really where we need to start because, again, there's only one of me. And I've had that conversation many times, right? I've had that conversation around like, man, there's so much risk. How do I show this? How do I get the business to understand it? And then having conversations with a coach to say, hey, there's only one of you. And Andy, yes, don't share our secrets, right? Like what happens in real talk stays in real talk.
Well, and okay, just one last thing about the whole standard work, right? I don't know, COVID maybe pushed us into this a little bit, but like we don't start up a line in the plant and go, we need 10 people, but we're only going to run it with 5 today and we expect the same results.
Right.
We expect the same output. That's pretty easy for us to visibly see. That's not going to work, or it's going to set all those people up for failure because it's never going to happen. Right. And I think what we forget is the same thing applies to the work that we do. And so, right, it's all about capacity and being realistic about like, here are my inputs and this is the output that you get.
Right. Exactly. And I do also like to mention this to people is that most of the time, the work that people are trying to put on your plate, whether the organization, your manager, that work is probably going to be more than the amount of time you have. It's just the way that people, right? Ideal state is that it is exactly what you can do, is exactly for the person. If anyone wants to add anything, then we start talking about additional head count, right? Like that's ideal state. But we know that the way things are written is that you are going to have a lot more stuff than time. And so having those conversations, being able to have those conversations with your manager and other key stakeholders is critical so that you don't get burnt out and so that you're not overworked.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the things that we focus on in Technical Leader Bootcamp, on how do I have those conversations to reset expectations, to talk about what my top priorities are, to talk about what's on plan B and C, right? But really clearly communicating to your managers and to other key stakeholders on, like, this is my A list that I'm working on. If for whatever reason I find time to do B and C, then they're there, right? But this is the A that I'm working on. And, it takes some skill to be able to have that conversation and tell your manager, right? I don't have time for that. Let's talk about reprioritizing. If that's more important than what's on my list, let's have that conversation. And that takes a little bit of practice to do.
Oh, it does. Because we want to write that shifting when they're like, well, I know it's on your B list, but have you done anything on it? To really stand in a spot and be like, no, we agreed last time I was not putting effort in that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to shift my focus? That means that this part won't get done and this over here won't get done, which was a priority last time.
Exactly.
It can be hard to stand in that space.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? Organizations love that, because
they need to know, be straightforward.
They love it. They have to, because they have to make the decision on, like, even from a CEO standpoint, right? Or a sales standpoint, or what we're going to market. They too have to make those decisions every day, all the time, on, like, what is the priority and what are we putting on the back burner for the next year? And it's like, oh, but people really honestly love this type of cookie. Well, what's our priority? Do we want to change something out to put something in? They're already having those conversations. So when you're able to step into that space and have those conversations, you're also telling the organization that you're ready to be more strategic.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very much. Whew. All right.
We're so happy you all have been here and in this
Very
conversation and adding your input and adding your perspective, because, I've also learned a lot just reading through your comments.
Awesome.
And reading through your perspective and what's out there and what you're hearing. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation and adding those comments.
Very much so. And we appreciate that you were here. And if you were here to see Neil, we'll definitely be looking to reschedule with him, and we will make sure we send out that information so that people have that, and we'll make sure we get those stories in.
Absolutely. Because I cannot wait to hear from Neil. I mean, it's going to be amazing. So we look forward to having him on the call in the near future.
Absolutely. So, well, we'll be back here next week, same time, same place.
That's right. See you next Wednesday.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.